If you've ever wondered what the differences are between fuzz and distortion pedals, I think you're really going to want to stick around and watch this video. We're going to talk a little bit about how these pedals sound different. We're going to listen to some sound clips. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the circuits and what makes these pedals sound different electronically. So if that sounds interesting, be sure you stick around and watch this video. I'm Jason from Fuzzlord, and I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. If you're new to the channel, we do music gear related videos every week, so be sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our weekly content. You can also keep up with Fuzzlord on the daily on the Instagram page at FuzzlordFX. You can check out more behind the scenes content on our Patreon page. There's a link in the description. And if you want to know more about the pedals, merch, see more demos, and just learn more about what Fuzzlord is all about, check out fuzzlordfx.com. So let's start off by talking about how fuzz and distortion are similar before we break down their differences. Fuzz and distortion both are going to amplify our signal, and they're going to provide a lot of gain and dirty up our sound. For this video, to keep things clear, let's refer to that as saturation. When most people talk about distortion pedals, they'll tell you that they're high gain and they really saturate your sound, but something specific to distortion pedals that's a bit different than fuzz is that distortion pedals tend to be very articulate and they have a bit more clarity in the note definition. So we might be strumming big bar chords and stuff, and we're going to be able to hear some nice clarity between those notes. The other classic thing that people will mention with distortion is that they're very tight sounding as well as being articulate. And, you know, they do the palm muting chuggy sound really good. Whenever I think of distortion pedals, I think of music like metal, punk rock, things like that, to where they want clarity in their sound, high gain, and a very aggressive guitar tone. Fuzz pedals can be described in a fairly similar way, but they are a bit different. So they are going to amplify our sound, they're going to saturate our signal and really dirty up our sound, but most people think of fuzz pedals as being a bit less articulate. They're not going to be as tight sounding as the distortion pedals, and I think of them as sounding a bit slower. Oftentimes they'll have a bit more bass and they are a bit more unruly sounding compared to a distortion pedal that's kind of a nice tight sound. So often with fuzz pedals, I think of genres of music like stoner rock, doom metal, or a classic example that I think a lot of us will be familiar with is the song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly. So now that we've talked a little bit about how these guitar effects sound different, let's play some music and compare them. So first we're going to hear a fuzz, and then we're going to hear distortion. We're going to play the same riff back to back so that we can compare how they sound. What I'm hoping you'll do is listen along, and then I want you to drop a comment if you'd like to about what you hear as the differences in the sound. Today we're going to be playing a Fuzzlord FTW 120 amplifier. The guitar I'm playing is an Eastwood McGeoch 1000. So we'll be hearing the Fuzzlord Effects MF4, which is based off the Big Muff, so it's a fuzz pedal. And then we're also going to be checking out the Fuzzlord Drone Master, which is based off a Rat. So that's going to be our distortion pedal we're going to be checking out in this clip. I want you to listen along and listen to the two different effects, and why don't you drop a comment and let us know what you hear as the differences between this sound. So to wrap up our comparisons between the fuzz and the distortion pedals talking about the sound, usually when people think of fuzz pedals, they are a bit unruly, more open sounding, tend to have a bit more bass, kind of feel a little slower, less clarity if we're playing like a bar chord and letting the notes ring out, but there's definitely a place in music for fuzz pedals. When I think of fuzz pedals, I think of bands like Fuzzlord, Electric Wizard, Windhand, and a whole bunch of other ones. So I'm curious to know from everyone watching, what is one of your favorite bands or musicians that uses a fuzz pedal, and maybe what is one of your favorite fuzz pedals? So drop a comment below and let us know one of your favorite bands that uses a fuzz. Distortion, a similar overall sound. They're going to provide a lot of saturation and really dirty up our signal, but they're going to sound a bit tighter usually, have a bit more note clarity if we're playing chords and things like that, and they usually feel a little bit faster in their response. And whenever I think of distortion pedals, I'm usually thinking of stuff more along the lines of like straight up metal bands or punk bands. So I think of musicians like Kurt Cobain. He used a Boss DS1, for example. I also think of like all the Swedish death metal dudes that played HM2 pedals. So again, if you've got a favorite musician or a favorite distortion pedal, drop us a comment below because I'm very curious to know what your favorites are. So without going into too much detail, let's talk about what makes these two different styles of effects sound different with respect to the actual circuits. Let's start with distortion because it's a little simpler to understand. The basics of a distortion pedal is that we take the input signal from the guitar and then we amplify it. So we can either use op amps or transistors or different methods to amplify the signal, but what we do after that, after we amplified our signal, is we run the signal through some hard clipping diodes. That is two diodes put in parallel next to each other in opposite directions. And basically what that creates is like a hard clipping threshold for a guitar signal. So depending on what kind of diodes we use is what voltage that clipping threshold will be. I always think of it like a hard limiter. So there is other videos on the channel talking about diode clipping, and we fire up the O-scope and get a good look at what is actually going on. So if you're curious, check out that video on the channel. But that is the basics of a distortion pedal. We amplify our guitar signal, get it big, and then run it through a pair of clipping diodes that are set up in a hard clipping format, which basically just like limit this window of how much voltage will go through it before the tops and the bottoms just get chopped off. What that does is it pretty much makes a square wave signal, and it makes it very saturated sounded or distorted, as a lot of people say. In respect to the circuit, that is how distortion pedals are dirtying up our sound. Take the input, amplify it, run it through some hard clipping diodes, which basically act as a hard limiter, chop off the tops and the bottoms of our waveform, which leaves us with a square wave signal. We'll take a quick look at the O-scope so that we can see what that looks like. All right, so here is the Drum Master. It's our distortion pedal for this test. Again, that's our clean test signal going in. Let's turn the pedal on. And distortion pedals tend to square wave the signal a lot more significantly. So let's turn up the gain and we can see, or let's go to silicon diode clipping. We can see that we kind of get a square wave signal. If we turn the gain down, we can get it to clean up some. So this is with the pedal on, we can pretty much get a clean tone out of it. There's our clean tone. We can turn up the volume, turn up the gain, and then just like when we talked about those hard clipping diodes causing like, it's kind of like a hard limiter. It's going to chop off the tops and the bottoms at a certain point and make it more square waved. So this is the classic hard clipping distortion pedal. Fuzz pedals are a little more mysterious because there is almost no real definition to what a fuzz pedal is as far as the way the circuits are constructed. But for the most part, fuzz faces, big muffs, tone benders, things like that, it's a series of cascading transistors, meaning one transistor running into the next. So what happens is we run our input signal into one transistor and it amplifies it, and then that amplified signal gets pumped into the next stage, amplified again, pumped into the next stage, amplified again. Some fuzz pedals have complicated negative feedback loops and other things to help them sound the way they do. So big muff style pedals, for example, are 4 transistor gain stages. We'll come into the first, it gets amplified. The next 2 gain stages do the same thing, but they have some clipping diodes wired in a soft clipping configuration, kind of unique to the big muff, and then a final gain stage to boost up the volume after the tone stack. So the biggest difference is how we create the saturation or the square wave signal. So let's take a quick look at the O-scope with the fuzz pedal so that we can get an idea of visually how the fuzz pedal is affecting the signal. So let's do a quick look at what fuzz does to our signal. Again, this is our clean baseline tone. It's pretty much if we're playing an A note with a guitar. Then if we turn on the fuzz, we can see, this is the big muff style fuzz. As we turn up our gain, it's really going to start distorting our signal or saturating it. The big muff is interesting because of the way they do the diode clipping to create the saturation, because it's kind of similar to an overdrive pedal. That's why we kind of get these like elongated peaks like that. So of course the filter will have different effects on the sound. This is like the big muff tone stack. So that, folks, is about what a big muff looks like on the screen. There's our volume control. Remember, our input signal was set right here, and this is so much louder. All right, everybody, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I'm Jason from Fuzzlord, and if you haven't yet, why don't you drop me a comment, let me know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know if you liked fuzz or distortion better, what you heard as the differences between these two effects. Maybe you didn't hear any, or maybe it was like night and day different to you. I'm curious to know. Also, drop a comment if you've got a favorite band that uses fuzz pedals or distortions, or a favorite pedal in general. I'm always curious to know, and I enjoy talking with everybody in the comments. So before we wrap it up, just want to give a big thank you to all of our supporters on the Patreon page. We couldn't do this without everyone's help, and it's just such a big help, and I really appreciate what everyone's doing. If you'd like to know more about the Patreon page and how you can support the videos we make here on the Fuzzlord channel, there's a link in the description. Also want to give a big shout out to our producer level Patreon supporters, David, Troy, TJ, and Rustin. I really appreciate what y'all are doing. Until next week, I'll talk to y'all in the comments, and I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and have a good week.